Wired.com presents The Geek's Guide to the Galaxy. And here is your host, David Barr Kirtley.
Hello, and welcome to episode 153 of Geek's Guide to the Galaxy. Today on the show, we'll be discussing the brilliantly perverse British TV show Black Mirror. If you haven't seen it, you should definitely go watch it now. It's sort of like the Twilight Zone for the social media era. 7 episodes have been released so far, and 6 of them are available on Netflix streaming right now. So go check out all 7 episodes before listening to this show, because this will potentially involve spoilers for every episode of Black Mirror, including the 2014 Christmas special starring Jon Hamm. And I'm joined by 3 guests. So first up, we've got Grady Hendrix, making his 6th appearance on the show. He's one of the founders of the New York Asian Film Festival, and the author of such books as Occupy Space and Satan Loves You. His most recent book, Horror Store, is set in a haunted IKEA, and he recently sold the TV rights to Gail Berman, producer of Buffy the Vampire Slayer and Angel. So Grady, welcome to the show.
Ahoy!
And also joining us today is Theresa DeLucci, who you may remember from our panel on Ridley Scott's Prometheus back in episode 63, and our panel on Season 4 of Game of Thrones back in episode 113. Her Game of Thrones reviews appear on Tor.com, and her Hannibal reviews appear on Boing Boing. Follow her on Twitter at @TDeLucci. So Theresa, welcome to the show.
Hi.
And also joining us today for the first time is Sunil Patel. His short fiction appears in magazines such as Intergalactic Medicine Show and Fireside Magazine, and his plays have been performed at the San Francisco Theater Pub and the San Francisco Olympians Festival. He also reviews books for Lightspeed magazine, and is currently working on a YA novel codenamed Untitled Female Indian Superhero Project. So Sunil, welcome to the show.
Thank you, glad to be here.
All right, so we're going to be talking about Black Mirror, and people have been telling me for a while I had to watch this show, and I finally got around to watching it, and people were absolutely right, it's fantastic. So I just want to encourage everyone to go watch it. And I know you guys, I feel I'm a little bit behind the curve here, because I know you guys all watched this a while ago. So why don't we start out, Grady, why don't you just tell us about how did you first hear about this show, Black Mirror, and how did you come to first watch it?
You know, it was recent that I heard about it. I don't even know who said something to me. I think it's because I know what it was. My sister was a big fan of Dead Set, which was Charlie Brooker's Big Brother zombie series that was on I think it eventually aired on BBC, but I think it started out on E4 in the UK. And so she said, oh, he's got this new thing I've heard about. I think it's just about to come on Netflix. And so I watched it when it came on Netflix. So I only saw it a few months ago, but it was all my sister's fault.
Well, yeah, and Dead Set is great. We talked about that back in episode 25, if anyone wants to go check that out. But how about Theresa? How did you come to hear about Black Mirror?
Well, my best friend Rupa had been watching it. She'd been downloading it back in like 2013. So she'd been talking about it a long time. She's an adjunct professor at Monmouth University. She teaches IT, and she shows episode 4 in her class like almost every semester. So yeah, it just took me a while to get around to watching it. And when it came on Netflix, that was the most depressing week of TV in recent memory.
Well, I just watched this entire thing in one day, so that was, one of the creepiest days of all time. But how about Sunil? Tell us, how did you first get into Black Mirror?
So around the end of 2013, I think I actually could not escape mentions of this show, Black Mirror, which I'd never heard of before until the end of 2013, but out of nowhere, it was everywhere. And I think it was a lot of Entertainment Weekly was covering it a lot. I was seeing it in suddenly online list of, best shows you're not watching, it's Black Mirror. And I think it was timed to when Robert Downey Jr. bought the film rights to one of the episodes, which I think is what caused this huge media explosion. But at that point, it was Black Mirror, Black Mirror, Black Mirror. And eventually that's when I wanted to check it out, because it was everywhere. It was a show everyone was talking about.
Right. Now I watched it on Netflix. And how long has it been? Does everyone watch it on Netflix, or was anyone watching it prior to that?
I did not watch it on Netflix. I watched it through ways you're not supposed to watch it.
Okay.
Yeah, I waited for Netflix.
I waited for Netflix too.
All right, but so I mentioned the show. It's fantastic. Actually, does anyone know anything about, like, where did this show come from? How did it get to be so great and so demented? Does anyone know anything about the background of the show?
There's not a lot of production info that I could find when I was looking around. Like, I just didn't see much. It's sort of, he'd done a series. I don't know if anyone ever watched Nathan Barley. The full episodes are up on YouTube, but it's, Charlie Brooker did that with, Chris Morris, who did Brass Eye and Jam and a couple of other really, really bizarre and very surreal and horrifying, comedy sort of shows, in the UK. And so they did this thing called Nathan Barley back in 2005. That started out as an online thing and became a TV show. And it's about just the horrible people you see around you every day. Guys with big headphones and like ironic t-shirts and beards and that kind of thing. And just what complete wastes of space they are. And it was really technologically pretty, advanced. Like, it did a lot with like, the guy's always promoting his website, trashbash.cock. And, so it was a lot of like stuff with social media and a lot of stuff with websites. And they were doing a lot of things with, online video, which, apparently was a big bone of contention between Charlie Brooker and Chris Morris, because Chris Morris wanted to do the video stuff, and Charlie Brooker was like, well, online video will never take off. The technology's too bad. It looks terrible. And then they were ahead of their time. So that's the closest thing I can find that he's sort of done like this, But where this came from, I can't find any info, really.
I don't have a source on this. I haven't actually read any articles specifically, but from what I have heard, the first episode, the national anthem, was originally a one-off. It was just supposed to be a small little movie that they made, and that became ordered into a series, which actually seems kind of similar in the way that he's done Nathan Barley, where he starts out with one thing and then it becomes a TV series.
Do you guys know? I honestly had never heard of Charlie Brooker before I started watching this. I mean, I'd watched Dead Set and I thought it was terrific, but I'd never really paid much attention to who had made it. Can you just tell us like about him specifically? What do you know about him?
I'm a big fan of Weekly White, which I was actually watching before I knew that Black Mirror was coming on, which is his sort of like weekly news roundup. And there'd been a Screen Wipe, which was sort of like a week, kind of like a news roundup too, but it was more about general media. But it's like a 22 to 30 minute, very, very fast paced thing where it's either him sitting on his couch or in a very proper television studio behind a news anchor desk showing clips of the week, just the most ridiculous stuff.
I did some research on him yesterday, so I listened to some interviews with him. Maybe some pertinent things is I'm going to get some of these facts wrong, but I think he was in college and he decided to write sort of his dissertation type thing on video games without checking to see if that was okay with anyone. And then they just rejected it out of hand when they found out it was about video games. And he didn't feel like writing another one, so he just never got a degree. And it's funny because Black Mirror seems to me so assured and professional and well done. But in person, he's very self-effacing and very, talking about what a disaster he is organizationally and things. And he says that the last episode of Dead Set he wrote in his underwear on his birthday crying because he didn't think he was going to be able to finish it. So he's a pretty funny guy. And yeah, I guess he says he spent his 20s smoking weed and writing video game reviews. And the show, The Wipe, Grady mentioned, I guess they do a lot of stuff about covering the TV industry, so he knows a lot about TV and hates a lot of it, and knows a lot about video games. And so you can kind of see all that stuff in this show. But I guess people have Sunil alluded to the first episode, the national anthem, and I think we can't avoid talking about that anymore. So Sunil, why don't you tell us a bit about the national anthem?
Oh, the national anthem. Well, the national anthem is an episode that is the first episode of Black Mirror. I think it is one of the least representative episodes of Black Mirror. It's not very science fiction-y. It is a glimpse into the future a little bit, but it's actually fairly present day like. And it is the episode that I always tell people, it's not all like this. I promise. It's not all this depraved. I'll actually go ahead and say this is what we like to call the pig fucking episode.
Right. So the premise is that there's the Prime Minister, the British Prime Minister, is woken up with news that a Princess Diana type princess character has been kidnapped, and the kidnapper is going to execute her at 4 p.m, unless the prime minister has sexual intercourse with a pig on live television. And this demand has been put out on YouTube, so everyone in the country is already aware of it, and there's no keeping this under wraps. And so, Theresa, what was your reaction to this episode?
Speechless, nauseous. I thought about it like the whole rest of the afternoon with like a sinking feeling in my stomach. I don't know that I could say that I enjoyed it because of what it was about, but I did enjoy the satire of it. It wasn't as futuristic as I was expecting, so I was glad to know that it wasn't like indicative of the whole series and what that would be like, but it felt very disgustingly plausible. You know, she's the Facebook princess. It's a performance artist who's manipulating things behind the scene to make this big point about people are missing what's really important in the world because they're too busy looking at their computer screens. It was really nihilistic and ugly, but I thought it was really well acted, and I loved Lindsay Duncan in it as the Prime Minister's advisor. She was great on Rome, so it was really good to see her here.
Well, yeah, you mentioned that it's satire, but it doesn't play like satire. I mean, it's played completely straight.
Yes.
And to just incredible effect, I thought. It actually reminds me a little bit of Dead Set, because I was thinking back to Dead Set, and when you hear it's like zombies attack Big Brother, you think it's going to be some ridiculous campy spoof kind of thing, but it's actually completely serious and terrifying. And I think it's really interesting that he does this, that Charlie Brooker does this sort of satire, but he plays it so straight.
Yeah, I gotta say, actually, it's my favorite episode of Black Mirror. Hands down, it's the one I love the most. There's, you know, I mean, I get that, okay, pig fucking's kind of squicky and all that, but, you know, the two things I love about it so much is, one is, Charlie Brooker's always been very, he's run afoul of sort of the human hive mind a couple of times, making jokes at the internet, I guess, which is now a person, hates, things like that. And there's a part of this that's really interesting to me in that, you know, everyone hates this prime minister, in the show, and they're all like relishing seeing what's going to happen. Oh, I can't believe he's going to do it. This is so disgusting, all this. And then everyone gathers around their TVs to watch, and they're drinking and they're laughing and they're cheering. And within like a few seconds of it beginning, people are horrified and turning away. And there's a really beautiful thing there, which is that everyone's always in this sort of group way. So we want this, we want that, we want all these things. And when they get it, they're usually disgusted with what it is they want. And I think it's a really, really great moment on the show. And I also love the last bit where his wife just can't stand to be around the prime minister anymore. You know, it's, yes, he did this for the right reasons and all this stuff, but there's some things that you do that you can't take back. You know, I love it so much.
Yeah. So what did you guys think of Theresa, do you agree about the ending?
Well, I thought it was, the way it was set up in the show, I thought it would have been, like, there's so much shame associated with this act, this disgusting thing he was basically forced to do. And, you know, the suspense of, will he really do this? Is this really something someone would do? And I got the sense at the end that, you know, he was so ashamed by what he had done, he couldn't pick up the phone when his wife was calling. And maybe in that moment, if he had spoken to her,
yeah,
they might have been able to face each other again privately. And the fact that she stayed with him, you know, after that, just publicly but privately couldn't look at him anymore, I think he could have avoided that if he had just shared his shame with her in like a private way and what it was really like and connected with her, you know, but it showed where his priorities were, you know, getting that, you know, affirmation from other people, his constituents.
Right. It's so interesting that, like Grady was talking about, that just the sort of psychological like waves in the story, how things turn, and just like the bunch of little twists at the ends is just really, really, really well done. I don't know, Sunil, do you have anything else you want to say about this episode? Any other thoughts on?
Yeah, well, I was laughing that is actually Grady's favorite episode because it's one of my least favorite, and I think it'll be fun. But at the end, I think we're definitely gonna have to sort of do our rankings, but that's always the thing you do with Black Mirror is because everyone has a very specific ranking in these episodes because they're all so different. You sort of see where people's tastes lie and what they like about each thing. I think it's really cool about Black Mirror that every episode is so unique that ranking them is not necessarily an indication of quality so much as also sort of what you look for in this show. But I actually don't, it's not my least favorite episode, but I actually really like it for being exciting and action packed and really tense. I thought it really worked well as a suspense thriller because you like Theresa was saying, you really were worrying, like, is it gonna do it? Is it gonna do it? What's gonna happen? Are they gonna find him? Is the sniper gonna do the thing? Now they're going to like a secret, house over here and there's guns, and I thought it really worked as an exciting episode like that. So I enjoyed watching it from that perspective. And I was definitely surprised when they went all the way.
When he walked into the room and the pig was there and they're like, "Sir, we drugged it." I just wanted to vomit.
Yeah,
That was awful.
They've put the pornography in his eye line. I mean, all the details were just so persuasive. But it's weird. I mean, I think what I really like about it is just how thought-provoking it is in terms of, well, this is a matter of life or death. Are you going to do this thing? And it's not going to hurt you physically in any way, right? It's just entirely about changing how other people perceive you or like the social cost of doing this thing.
But the really interesting thing, too, and it just pops up at the end is, it's like, don't they pop in a few months later and his poll numbers are back where they should be? And it's sort of like no one remembers it anymore, which I think is fascinating, even before the internet, but it happens so much faster and more viciously now. We find these people that we just want to humiliate publicly and we really chew them up and spit them out. And then 8 months later, 1 year later, they're a trivia question answer, like we forget about them, but they got to live with it. It's really, I love that in the show.
But see, Grady, I didn't have the sense that everyone had forgotten about it so much as that they felt sympathy for him, that they all hated him, but then he had done this thing for the greater good. And that made people admire him in a way.
Yeah, I think his poll numbers went up.
They went up, but I guess, and it's been a few weeks since I saw it, but I thought it was sort of normalizing if I remember correctly, because it turned out he didn't need to fuck the pig. Like, that was the worst thing, is it was completely unnecessary. So it was just interesting to me, that like the world moves on and he and his wife are living with this horrible, I guess you can't say an elephant in the room, but pig in the room.
I mean, so Sunil, what would you say is something you don't like about this episode that sort of knocks it out of the top kind of spots for you?
Well, one thing like I said, it is one of it's not very science fictional, and I was definitely more attracted to the episodes with more science fictional elements to it. The episodes that I liked the most were about themes and ideas that I care about more. This was sort of, I do interested in sort of things like how social media and public perception are a thing, but that's not really my main focus. And I think people who are a lot more interested in that realm of society and social sciences are going to be gravitate this episode because it's making a very specific point about that world. But it's not completely what I'm interested in.
Does anyone else have any criticism of this episode?
They could have gotten a prettier pig.
Okay, so Sunil, why don't you tell us which episode was your favorite?
So the episode, it generally, I say the tie between Be Right Back and the entire history of you. But I generally think that Be Right Back has the upper hand for me because it's a lot more emotionally wrenching for me. But those two episodes, I think, are the top two easily. The episodes I would say, if you want to tell someone to watch Black Mirror, those two episodes give you an idea of why I'm so ecstatic about the show.
Yeah, and so I'll just say for people who maybe don't remember or haven't watched it, so Be Right Back, there's a woman and she has basically an android replica of her dead boyfriend constructed from his social media profile so that it acts like he would have acted. And then entire history of you, there are people and they have these little microchips or something implanted in their heads that record all their visual data so they can sort of rewind and look at anything that they've seen for the entire period of time that the device had been implanted. And so I don't know. So Grady, what do you think? Do you think that these are some of the better episodes?
Yeah, I mean, they really are terrific. It's funny. it's really hard to pick nits with Black Mirror just because they're so well done. I mean, they're well written, they're not lazy, they're well shot. And so when I feel like I have any criticism of an episode, it more has to do with I wish they'd done this, I wish they'd done that, rather than they did something wrong. And, you know, with Be Right Back, which is, I thought, tremendously moving, I loved it so much because originally when the woman, her husband dies, and the fake version of him is simply an online presence. She Skypes with it, she tweets with it, she texts with it, you know, and sends him pictures, but he's non-corporeal. And then she's able to sort of, you know, go to a next stage in it, which is an actual physical replica of her husband. And I found the part of it where he was not a physical presence so much more compelling than when he is, because it's just like once you have the physical presence, well, then you run up into all these like, it starts like, well, you know, does he eat? Does he sleep? Does he go to the bathroom? What are you going to do with this guy? Does he just sit around all day? Like, and as long as it was like a non-physical one, to me, that was so rich because so many people are in long distance relationships. I mean, I consider people close friends that I text with that I see maybe once every couple of months. It's, you know, we have this really weird relationship with our friends right now. I text with my wife during the day more than I actually see her. And, you know, and to me, it's like we have this really weird relationship with people who aren't there. And I really loved that episode when it was digging deep on that.
Yeah, I actually heard Charlie Brooker say that what gave him the idea was he was just on Twitter one day, and the thought just popped into his head. What if all these people are dead, and it's just software, like, pretending to be them? Would I even know the difference, you know?
Yeah. Well, and I had a friend die a couple of years ago, and I came across his contact info on my phone while I was cleaning out contacts. And and it was funny. I was reading, I think maybe the same Guardian article you did, where he talked about that happened to him also. And I couldn't delete it. I mean, it felt way too final, but at the same time, you know, what's he going to do? Call me? Like, we have a really weird relationship with people who aren't physically present in our lives. It's bizarre. And I love this episode because I found it very moving. And I hate this episode because I feel like there's so much more material there. You know, there could be a whole season of Black Mirrors dealing with that.
Well, right. And we're going to have to talk about that in terms of the episode, The Entire History of You. Maybe I just will say that the episode, The Entire History of You, was originally conceived as kind of more of a like thriller, and they said that they just couldn't afford to do it. You know, or they didn't have the budget and they didn't have the time to do it, so that's why they made it more of an interpersonal story. And Robert Downey Jr.'s company, I think, has optioned it to try to make it into a feature film, more along the original premise. So yeah, I think a lot of these stories might benefit from being expanded a little bit. But so Theresa, let's get you in here. What did you think about either of these episodes?
I kind of agree with Sunil. I think Be Right Back and Entire History of You were kind of like neck and neck as some of my favorites. Although I did really like 15 Million Merits, but for different reasons.
That's my third one.
Yeah, I mean, well, The Entire History of You, it just hit on a lot of like neuroses and insecurities. Like, I would not want the ability to be able to relive all of my mistakes and potential fuck ups. And like, I don't even listen to my, these podcasts. Like I just let them exist. Like, I don't want to hear like everything I've done that was, every time I misspoke or, had an awkward moment, things like that. And then to put that into the context of, like the job interview was interesting. And those were horrible people that he was interviewing with, like really amoral company. But then to put that in a relationship that's a long-term relationship in decline and mistrust, and some of the images in there were some of the most disturbing things. Like, I'd put them on par with the pig fucking, when...
the sex scene.
The sex scene, when they're both, their eyes are, clouded over, whited over, and they're both watching memories of actual good sex, and they're just mechanically fucking. Oh, it was awful,
To me, that's like the most chilling moment in all the Black Mirror episodes is that sex scene.
Totally agree. It was like, and I still don't know if, he was watching the two of them having sex from earlier in their relationship, what was she watching? Are we supposed to think she was watching a similar clip, or was she watching, a memory with the guy from Marrakesh, like that douchebag guy?
Oh, I never even thought of that.
Oh, that's good, Theresa. So you should be writing these things. Yeah.
I mean, that episode, I used to list it as my favorite because it felt so real and really used that grain technology in a way, it felt like a really strong SF story. But then I kind of think about it a little way too, and it's kind of indicative of some of the other problems I have with Black Mirror, kind of overarching, and that's kind of like the way women are portrayed in certain episodes. That definitely gives you something to think about, like, okay, the future really sucks for everybody, but women in particular are, they're unfaithful, easily manipulated, liars, criminals, things like that. It brought up some other issues, so I knocked it down a peg and would put Be Right Back ahead of it just slightly because Agent Carter, I don't know anybody's names on the show. Agent Carter was so good in that episode, and so different from a lot of the other women that are portrayed on Black Mirror.
I had no idea that was Haley Atwell until the credits hit, and I was astounded.
I just watched Captain America like 2 months ago, so I'm like, oh, hey, her.
I just want to say about the tech. You mentioned the what was it called? The grain technology. All the technology in this is so convincing, and I find that so striking when most Hollywood movies, they can't portray current technology in a way that seems even the slightest bit convincing.
Yeah.
And this actually portrays futuristic technology in a way that seems completely believable. And it seems like you can just imagine going into the Apple store in a couple years and trying out some of this stuff.
So the thing you said, Theresa, about how the entire history review sort of feels like a good science fiction story is sort of how I feel about every episode of Black Mirror. Every episode of Black Mirror feels like an incredibly good science fiction story that I read. Like a really, and like Grady said as well, everyone is so well executed, well written, well acted, well constructed. And the funny thing about the entire history review is it is actually like a very good science fiction story that I read afterward. I don't know if you've read Ted Chiang's The Truth of Fact, The Truth of Feeling.
No.
It was a Hugo-nominated story, but it is about a very similar technology. It's called Remem in his story, where again you can play back all your memories visually and orally, just like in the show, like an episode. And he takes a very different tack to it, but it's using that same concept of what if all your memories were stored visually and you could replay them. And it's actually really well. It's actually a great story that sort of takes that same concept and does a very different thing with it, which is a thing that I like about science fiction in general. When you say people, oh, this ripped this off, or like this is the same idea, is that it's not about the idea itself, but what you do with it.
Yeah, well, I mean, I used the same idea in the story I wrote in college that won the Asimov Award. So, I mean, it's not, yeah. And it was funny because I thought I'd come up with that idea, but then, like, my radar is up. So every time I see somebody use that idea earlier than me, I note it. And I saw one it went back to like 1834 or something. So, yeah, I mean, all the ideas in these episodes are pretty familiar science fiction ideas, I would say, right? Let me think about it. But I mean, it is how
the pig fucking.
Except for the pig fucking one, yeah.
Yeah.
What I also like, I think it's similar. I actually just read a Ted Chiang story collection, The Stories of Your Life and Others. So I'm on a big Ted Chiang kick right now. But what I like about Ted Chiang is that he takes a science fictional concept and he sort of takes it to its extreme. He thinks about as much as possible what the ramifications would be to society, to a person, and so on. And I think that's what Charlie Brooker does in all these episodes. He takes one idea and takes it to an extreme, and takes it to the breaking point of what it will do to a human person. Like entire history review, like what would be the worst possible thing that could happen with this technology? It completely destroys his relationship.
Well, that's actually, it's interesting you say that because it's one of those things that I find very one of my biggest dissatisfactions with genre right now is people are very much, and there's a lot of room for this, a lot of books right now are very much into big, wild, crazy ideas, which is so much fun. But everything sometimes feels like it's set at volume 11. And I kind of miss that idea of taking a very simple, very straightforward concept like, hey, nothing can ever be forgotten here. In this relationship, you never get like that actually nice human thing that's not a design flaw. It's like a small mercy where Who said what? We'll never be 100% sure. And then just sort of extrapolates from there what the emotional ramifications of that are. And I find when I find an author who's doing that, I really, that's just such my jam right now is the smaller stories that feel more emotionally connected and kind of grounded.
Right. I want to read this listener comment. It's apropos here, but so Will Miner says, as far as I know, Black Mirror is the only pure sci-fi show on TV, in that it actually shows how society is affected by technology. Not even Star Trek did that, parentheses, at least not very often. What do you guys think about that? Is this the only pure sci-fi show on TV?
Well, if you take the definition of science fiction to be fiction about science, then yeah, I mean, I don't know what else is out there, except like CSI, maybe? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I can see that, because I think that's why I get that feeling of reading a really good science fiction story from watching Black Mirror. It does what really good science fiction does. It takes science fiction and uses science to explore what the future would be like, and it also comments on the present as well, regarding what these scientific advancements could tell us about how we're actually acting currently. To go off what Grady was saying just earlier, this actually goes to Be Right Back, is you were saying that, we have this sort of same we have the same relationship with death and online identity currently, where, you find someone on your phone who's no longer there, and it has this very specific reaction to you. And in Be Right Back, he does the same thing, where he takes a very simple idea, what if you could communicate with the digital personality of the person that is deceased, and he takes it to an extreme. He starts out with the just communicating online, and then he brings it to the Android full version. And I actually love the first part as well. We were just discussing online identity versus personal identity. But then I also love that he takes it to that next extreme, where now this entire person is in your house. He resembles your husband, but is not your husband. And that's what I really love about this episode, is that in most stories, you would get the story where you get this AI version of your dead person, and the grieving widow essentially treats the AI like their husband. But I love that she's completely aware at every point that this is not her husband. And that's like a block between them, and it makes it more interesting that she has to sort of understand, how can I relate to this android who is constructed from my husband but is not my husband? So there's a weird identity issue there, where she has to kind of construct a new version of her husband, and whether she can relate to him as this new version of him, because she knows it's not him, but she wants something.
I kind of want to contrast the ending of Be Right Back with the entire history of you, because I liked the ending of Be Right Back better because of what you're talking about, that it seems like there's this new technology and it has its upsides and it has its downsides, and she kind of finds a way to live with it. Whereas I felt like the ending of the entire history of you, where he just like chops the thing out of his head, it felt like more of a like an old-fashioned kind of science fiction thing, where there's some new technology and then we find out it's horrible and then we like destroy it. And it would be like, you're just like, you have like a bad experience with your iPhone. You're like, I'm never using a phone again or something. It seems like once the technology's there, I would have liked to see an ending that was more like shades of gray than just like, I'm chopping this new technology out of my head.
Yeah, it was interesting that they were, Be Right Back, or Entire History of You, and then Be Right Back. You could watch them back to back on Netflix. So it kind of like seeing Entire History of You immediately before Be Right Back kind of colors the way you see the very beginning of Be Right Back, because when I first saw it, watching the guy on his iPhone all the time, ignoring his beautiful girlfriend, I'm like, oh, this is going to be another story about like how tech addiction, kills a good relationship. And then it completely changed and it turned into something else. Actually, it turned into Her, that movie Her, which was produced around the same time, similar themes, except in this version of the future, there's no high-waisted pants. So win for Black Mirror on that. And then it became something else yet again. I think Charlie Brooker's really good at doing these kind of reversals, like not in that M. Night Shyamalan, oh, what a twist way, but more in a like devastating like series of like, you think you're watching one thing, then this thing is going to happen instead. It goes completely off into somewhere else. And I thought this story did it well. White Bear, of course, and then White Christmas. They're really, it's like a house style for Black Mirror. I don't think that at the end she wasn't like living with the technology in a way. She put it up in the attic, like how Ash's mom put all of his dead brothers like pictures up in the attic. Like she just didn't want to look at it and deal with it. So she just hides
but it wasn't
away
like she like blew up the robot or something.
But that was what I was going to say, though, is that, yeah, he winds up in the attic next to everyone's, the Commodore 64 and your VCR. And with any other outmoded piece of technology, you don't want it in the house anymore. You don't get much use for it, but you can't stand to put it in the garbage. So you stick it in the attic. I mean, to me, that's so sad. He's in the attic with, like, the old television.
That's actually interesting. I hadn't actually seen it from that perspective. I sort of viewed, I think, the way David views it in a way that she sort of accepted him as a part of her life in a way. But because he's so humanoid to me, I guess at that point I almost viewed him as humanoid as well, and so I viewed him in that perspective as opposed to a piece of technology in the attic. But the fact that she couldn't, kill him, which is what it seemed to be moving towards, was she was going to destroy him. The fact that she could not do that sort of spoke to his quote unquote humanity as an AI.
But at the same time, I'm sure everyone's seen that really famous IKEA commercial that Spike Jonze did, where they put the little lamp in the garbage and it rains and the sad music plays and you feel really sad for the lamp. And then a guy walks on and says, "You feel sorry for this lamp? What are you, stupid? It's an inanimate object."
And am I a bad person? I might have made him jump off the cliff.
Oh.
He seemed perfectly nice for a robot and everything. He was great, but
that
that's
was
not...
Bill Weasley.
Is that who that was? I thought he looked familiar.
Yes.
Oh, all right.
All
right, now maybe I'll rethink my stance on
That's
that.
the thing about this series. It's like you mentioned, the woman from Rome, is there are so many people from other shows in this show, and I never ever recognized them because they were so different. Like, in 50 Million Merits has Posh Kenneth from Skins, and I love Skins, and Posh Kenneth was great. And I had no idea if that was Posh Kenneth.
I want to talk, though, about Theresa mentioned the ending of White Bear and said it was good. I had mixed feelings about that. So this is the episode where there's a woman and she wakes up in a chair and seems to be in a world in which everyone's been... It's like the movie The Signal, basically, where everyone's kind of been infected by some electronic signal that's turned them into kind of zombies who just record you with their phones, and then some people go around killing you. And then at the end, it turns out, spoiler warning, just making sure that she's like a convict and this is her punishment. And I felt that there weren't enough clues. And so I felt the twist at the end kind of came out of nowhere, and I would have appreciated more clues. But I'd be curious. Sunil, what did you think about that?
So White Bear is number 4 on my list of episodes. I know a lot of people who love it, and I completely understand why people love it. I think it's sort of a great horror movie setup. And I loved the twist when it came, and it completely blew my mind and broke apart everything I thought about the episode. And it was really like a messed up, vision for society. But I think I agree with you that it did sort of, it felt like a little bit of too much of a twist, and that there was not much set up to it. Is because it sort of made you feel like you were in a different sort of episode and it was going to be about something else. But I think once the twist happened and it explained everything, and it sort of went, and you see the first half in a new light, it does work. And I think one of my favorite parts about that episode is the credits. And Black Mirror does this sometimes in the credits. It also does it in the Waldo moment to less great effect. But I love how in White Bear, the credits, the episode's over, here are the credits. And then as the credits flash, you get the episode's still going on, and you see the cycle continuing. And it becomes all the more chilling that, like, this is just going to keep happening over and over.
Right, I agree with you that the credits were very effective, and they did a good job of selling it in retrospect. But I thought they could have used more setup. But Grady, where do you come down on this one?
It's funny. I didn't love White Bear when I first saw it, especially once the twist started to come out. But out of every single episode of Black Mirror, it's the one that's the most stuck in my head, and the one I keep returning to, and the one where the visuals really sing for me. And maybe it's because, like, I'm a horror movie guy, and there's, it's such a horror movie setup. But also, there's something really resonant about it in the sense that it does an amazing job of flipping your expectations. At first you're on her side, then you're not on her side, then you're on her side again. And I always really appreciate when something like really gets you flipping that way. But there's also, that is the common, I guess that's the platonic ideal of punishment, right? that someone can feel horror for something they've done without it ever getting stale for all eternity. I mean, that's what hell's supposed to be in some conceptions. That's what incarceration is supposed to be. You're supposed to spend 30 years reflecting on your your sins, you know. That's what being sent to your room is supposed to be. You're supposed to go up there and think about what you've done. And it's so harrowing to actually see it sort of emotionally unpacked, that this is what it would be like to experience the full horror of something you've done, a crime you've committed, to feel guilty about it, and to have that never get stale. So maybe that's just because it's such a big cultural idea, and it really unpacks it in such a way that's like makes you feel shitty for ever believing in that cultural idea. Maybe that's why it sticks with me.
I think it's actually sort of similar to the national anthem in that way, the way you pointed out that it was sort of the thing that the society and people in general, they think they want. But, you know, in national anthem, it was, we think we want to see this horrible act and then we're ashamed of it. Whereas in White Bear, it's like, we think we want to punish criminals this way and we're pretty okay with it.
Well, and it's funny though. It's like, you know, I agree, but it's like, you feel like that's just, like you come away from that episode, maybe this was just me, because you're right, the audience feels no remorse about it, but you feel like they're so degraded as humans. You know, you're like, you just feel like, God, these people are just lost and hopeless if this is something they approve of.
They take their kids too.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's so weird.
You know, this would have been a completely different episode if we weren't with her point of view, the perpetrator's point of view from the beginning. Do you know what I mean? If we had started out with anyone else's point of view, at the end we go, well, that's kind of crummy, but she did, you know, kill a kid. She's getting what she deserves. But because we start out with the perpetrator, we feel this automatic sympathy, you know, just because that was our originating point of view.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting when you watch it because she has her mind wiped. Is she or is she not the same person who committed her crimes when she has no memory of them at all? So It's the people in the park are doing the same thing, essentially being spectators to torture, which is what she was incarcerated for in the first place. But then it's true when you find out, oh, she's, you know, helped with a child murder and, you know, she's horrible. And you're like, yeah, fuck this lady. But then wait, like every day. And is this really, like, that's like really cruel and too unusual. And then I kind of think about some of, like, this episode felt a little less plausible to me than other Black Mirror episodes. Like, is this only like specially notorious criminals that they do this for? You know, does every kind of criminal get a justice park of their own? And how would that work?
Is this like a holiday in that town where everyone doesn't have to work and they just go and participate in the spectacle?
Right.
I assumed it was like a long weekend or something.
Yeah, like a camping trip. And
well, how weird must it be on like Wednesday though, when like she's going through all this horror and there's like 2 people filming.
Wait, I want to pick up on what Theresa was saying though about if they've wiped her memory, is it still her? And that's a really interesting philosophical question, but I think we have the same question now with prisoners. You know, there's some 50-year-old guy in prison, and he's in prison for life for something he did when he was 18. Is he still even the same person, really, as that 18-year-old who committed the crime?
Well, I think one of the reasons the show seems so horrible is kind of exactly this, which is this is punishment without even a nod to the conception of the fig leaf of rehabilitation. She's never going to change because she doesn't remember it. She's just going to be punished forever. And it's a little bit like what you're saying. If someone's in prison for 30 years and they find Jesus or whatever it is they do, and they really become a different person, like, we're not giving them a chance to be rehabilitated if we're not commuting their death sentence to life or their life sentence to some sentence of years. So, you know, the idea of punishment without rehabilitation, without even like, and stripping away the illusion of rehabilitation that we're supposed to believe in, which doesn't seem to exist so much in prisons anymore, is you're just left with punishment. It's horrifying.
All right, so I think we need to move on to some other episodes. And Theresa, you mentioned that you really liked 15 Million Merits. You want to talk? Actually, okay, so this is a episode where there's it seems to be some sort of dystopian future where people have to ride exercise bikes in order to earn points that they can spend on stupid crap. And then the only way to escape is a American Idol style reality show talent contest. So, well, what did you like so much about this episode?
Well, first I thought it was the most beautifully filmed of the episodes. I think it was really eye-catching with all of these screens, like garish colors of the reality show, the animation of all the different kinds of reality media and, like Xbox avatars and stuff. It was relatable, but taken to like the 10th power. And, I just like that it was a dystopia. It was definitely the most like futuristic, like Twilight Zone-y of the episodes. Like it's completely not given a context for why the world is that way. They're not just powering, they're powering their surroundings. Like they're riding the bicycles to create energy that powers their buildings and stuff too. So you get this sense of like an energy crisis, and these people just have to be on these bikes and do this work, and how they get out. I really loved Bing, and I loved Lady Sybil in it. I liked their romance. It was sweet in this kind of like garish fake world, like really 1984. And then the ending, again, like those reversals where you think you're watching one kind of program, and then she goes on stage and does her audition, and it becomes completely grotesque. And then when you see Bing trying to work to get back on the show, and it becomes yet another thing that leaves you devastated again, because that's what Black Mirror really likes to do. They like to make you feel sick to your stomach.
I think when I described this episode, this entire series, I basically said like this show is fucking brutal, but it's like a really good hurt because it's earned. It's really earned. It's emotionally devastating, but it earns it in so short a time too. Because especially in this, you mentioned this world is really fully realized, and this is actually the longest episode. It's a supersized episode. Well, it's longer, not as long as a Christmas special, but it's the regular episode is like 15 minutes longer than the regular episodes. But all the steps were really well constructed, and you felt like you'd been transported to this dystopian future. And I agree with you that one of the reasons it's third and not maybe timed for first and second is because you can't really tell what the world is like. The world building's kind of iffy because I have no idea why this world exists like this. It feels a little more satirical as opposed to a realistically plausible future with satire elements.
Right. Yeah, I agree with that. I agree also with what Theresa was saying about how beautiful. I mean, just the part where the girl's singing, I just found so beautiful, and that makes it so much worse when that gets it gets shot all over. But yeah, I found this episode, like, at first I didn't like this episode as much because of what you're saying, Sunil, and also I found it a little bit slow, but then the ending I just thought was so devastating. And I mean, I think maybe just because like I do this podcast, I'm like, yeah, I'm going to change the world with my message and stuff. And watching this episode made me think like, oh man, am I just, is there any way to escape being co-opted by the system, or does any message that you try to put out there just become commodified? I mean, it really makes you think about stuff like that.
I know they put Bing's Rebellion, it's turned into like a digital Che Guevara shirt.
Yeah. Well, this episode also features what I think is one of the most horrifying concepts in Black Mirror, because it's something that I think we're about 5 minutes away from as a culture, which is you have to pay to make advertising go away.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
It's really terrifying.
Yeah, I mean, this whole world, like the whole aspiration for all of these people is to become like the best possible shopper. Everything's like, oh, it's so great on this, porn star, reality star now. Oh, you get to buy your own clothes, live in a bigger apartment, and you get a view of the outside world, which we don't really know is real. I don't think it matters if that, Bing's final view is real. No one seems to go outside anyway.
I was going to say, he's never going outside.
Exactly. Even Bing himself, he just wants to be a better shopper. He complains that nothing is real in this world, but his love for Abby is real. But he doesn't notice that there is another girl in that facility with him who does have feelings for him, but he just kind of ignores her and goes for like the prettier, shinier girl.
Yeah.
Not recognizing that other people will have real feelings too. So it's kind of like when I look at that girl like sitting alone on her bed, kind of crying as Bing is kind of selling out, I thought that was really devastating too. Like the side characters in the story all really fit like with the main theme. It was a really, really tight episode.
I also thought it was interesting how the first-person shooter that he plays basically encourages you to hate the poor, It's sort of like this, it's like literal class warfare, I guess.
Well, one thing that keeps getting brought up, I think, over and over, and it really is one of those things with Black Mirror, is that every episode is depressing. And they all end terribly. And like 15 Million Merits is one of the few where you think it's actually going to have a happy ending, and it just has an even worse ending. And I kind of was thinking about this because I'm like, well, is Charlie Brooker just a pessimist or what? And I sort of realized, though, these episodes are about 50 minutes long, and in some cases 15 million Merits are a little longer, but it's like they're not long enough to have a happy ending. Like, we're introduced to the technology that humanity's going to interact with or whatever the thing is. And by the time he's done sort of unpacking the impact that's going to have, and you realize how devastating and horrible it is, it's time for the episode to be over. So I sometimes wonder if these episodes would be a little happier if they were longer.
But I like that though, Grady, because I mean, I actually heard him say that, you know, you don't get that on TV. You know, TV is it's like the TV shows in this, in these episodes. It's just this anodyne crap to kind of, you know, make you, like stay asleep, and that he wanted to do something different. And that's why I like the anthology format, is you can have horrible things happen to the characters, and that's the end of the story. They don't have to come back next week for another episode.
Yeah. No, and totally. And I mean, look, it's definitely, I would hate to see some like happy ending tacked onto the last few minutes. But I also wonder if some of the reason they're so resolutely downbeat is simply the limitations of, you got 50 minutes.
Well, I don't know about that specifically, especially when you consider White Christmas, which is a lot more time. Still don't have the ending. But
True.
I do agree that every episode is so depressing and sort of cynical in a way. And I mean, I love them because of that, but I also wonder, there's definitely this push in our culture in general where it seems like depressing tragedy drama is quote unquote good, like quality wise, and anything happy and positive is bad. You think, you look at the Oscars, it's always dramas. Comedies cannot win awards because comedies are considered to be a lesser form of art.
Yeah, I review Game of Thrones like professionally. It's torture every week, especially this season. There's definitely nothing feel good about it, and it's so popular.
Right,
Still.
you look at
people expect it.
Right, you even think what are the shows that everyone look up and think it's Breaking Bad and Mad Men and people about terrible things happening to people being sad, and that's sort of what we consider quality. And Black Mirror is incredible at that. And I wonder what would a happy ending episode of Black Mirror be like, and would that even be an episode of Black Mirror? But I do wonder, whether part of the reason for I need depressing, tragic, cynical ending is because that is a marker of quality in our culture.
I don't think so. I mean, I think my difficulty with the idea that the show was made dark to be popular is that it seems to me that everything about the show was like done in a complete like lack of concern about whether it would be popular or not. I mean, it's kind of like. It's like hard to even imagine how this show got made. It's so, so non-commercial in so many ways.
Well, it wasn't made in America.
Right. I mean, yeah.
And of course we screamed when we heard they were trying to bring it to America, because it's none of this is going to fly on network television.
But I don't think that there was any commercial motive behind the show at all. I think that Charlie Brooker is just like angry at television, and this is him expressing his anger at television, and it's a complete artistic statement as far as I can tell.
Well, I think you're right. I mean, but I think the thing people respond to, because I think Sunil's point's a good one, which doesn't necessarily apply to Black Mirror, but which is that we are predisposed in like culture to think depressing things are somehow more serious than funny things. But I think one thing we respond to with Black Mirror that transcends, that I think plays into what you're saying, is this show is really honest. I mean, it's very, very honestly made. There's nothing in this show that I would call a cheat or a shortcut or, it very much is, here's the technology, here's the people it's affecting, how does that play out, and how can I show that? And I think that's definitely what I respond to. And what makes it feel so different is it so unrelentingly plays straight and fair. And there is also, I mean, I gotta say, against my own point about it being resolutely depressing, between the lines, actually, Black Mirror is kind of optimistic in the sense that so many of the episodes are about how things that we generally think of as failures of being human, like death or forgetting stuff or shame, are actually, like, instead of being design flaws, they're actually there for useful reasons. You know, we, like, in like the entire history of you is what happens in a relationship where nothing can be forgotten. You can't have a relationship, you know, and Be Right Back. What happens when there's no more death? Well, you know, it kind of doesn't work. Or national anthem. What happens when, like, shame is sort of gone, you know, and when everyone as a country decides, like, we're going to be shameless, and it doesn't work. It has this devastating impact on the people at the center of it. So there is something kind of optimistic about it.
All right, so I think we need to cover the last two episodes here before we run out of time. We had a listener comment from Andrew McPherson. He says, only 1 week episode in the first two series, I thought. The Waldo moment was kind of funny, and I thought the ending scene of a totalitarian regime based on an animated politician was amusing, but overall the episode fell flat for me. What do you guys think about that? Theresa, what do you think about that appraisal of the of that episode?
I totally agree. Totally agree. It's probably my least favorite episode. Just I watched it once and I was like, oh, okay, that's kind of interesting, but I didn't like Waldo's voice at all. I didn't find him funny for even a second, which I know I wasn't supposed to per se, but it made it really annoying to watch the episode in general. I did like the candidate Liam Monroe. That was Brutus from Rome, or
Right.
Edmure Tully from Game of Thrones. He's always good in everything. He always plays such a jerk. The poor guy is like really typecast. And I did like the totalitarian, you know, like the cartoon running the world. But I find it hard to believe that anyone would remember Waldo after like 15 minutes of, you know, his shtick. Like, it would get old and people would move on. If they could forget pig fucking, they could forget, you know, Waldo.
Right. Does anyone disagree with that?
I didn't. I actually liked the episode because there was something I really responded. I agree. It's not my favorite of the bunch, but I did really like it because there was something really interesting in it, which is that, you know, politicians are sort of required to be entertainers now. And the more entertaining they are, the more attention they get. And, you know, politics is really boring. And the people who are actually doing stuff and involved in it are kind of boring people. And the things they're involved with are largely boring. And now that politics is sort of like a lot of different competing TV channels, you know, it has to be exciting and interesting. And I did think this cut to sort of the heart of that issue. In a way that I really enjoyed. But yeah, it's certainly not what I would say is my favorite.
I mean, I thought the premise was good. I think even Charlie Brooker said that it didn't quite come together. I mean, I thought my main problem is that the plot is, like, every scene is basically just the guy who operates Waldo saying, I don't want to do this. And it feels like it never really goes anywhere. I don't know, Sunil, what was your take on this episode?
I agree that there's no possible here. This is easily the weakest episode. I would actually say that out of all the episodes, this is the only one that actually fails. Every episode takes its premise and gets it to a place and to a satisfying resolution that may have parts messed up, but overall it does what it intended to do. And this episode, I feel, was not satisfying at the end, like the reader said. I felt that it had this idea of this comedian mixing comedians and politics, like what if Jon Stewart were like actually had real influence on politics, kind of thing. But it like you said, it doesn't really go anywhere, and then it ends up in this weird that's the credit scene, the weird government thing, which wasn't really set up very well, and it ends up being kind of a mess. It just doesn't feel at all as well written as any of the other episodes, especially when it came out, and especially because this one is the last one I watched, you know, after the first 5 before White Christmas came out. Here are 5 episodes that are really good, really interesting, very well written, and then this is the last thing they put out, and this is the one where, like, they didn't hit it. They didn't hit the mark on this one.
But, you know, it's interesting because this is what Charlie Brooker does for a living and has for a long time, and it's the same thing Jon Stewart and Stephen Colbert do. They mock politicians and turn them into entertainment. And on the one hand, I think that can be very useful. And, you know, it leads to some very funny moments. But, like, I was watching an episode of Charlie Brooker's Weekly Wipe, which is sort of his news critique show. And it was talking about one of the candidates who was running in the recent election. And it was making fun of the fact that everywhere he went, he has a pint of beer to make himself look like a normal average Joe. And so it's this guy in setting after setting really awkwardly drinking a pint of beer. Now, that's really funny. I laughed really hard, but what if he was also had some good ideas? What if he also was a good... And so I think it's interesting with Waldo that this is Charlie Brooker saying what I do is kind of bogus and horrible and degrading.
This also, of course, is one of the less science fictional episodes, which is again why it didn't play as well for me.
Yeah, I agree. It was very slow. It was just a lot of the same man, like kind of blubbering and protesting. Just,
Can I actually ask a question, Theresa?
Yeah.
Because you were saying something earlier about the depiction of women, and it's something I hadn't really thought about much with this, and I'd kind of like to hear what you had to say on it, just because I'm kind of curious.
Yeah, sure. Actually, that could kind of lead into White Christmas because there were a lot of women in that as well. I think since I kind of binged through this series, and took a little break before White Christmas, that I felt by the time the Waldo moment came around, I'm just kind of a lot of the same stories. It's, man pain is kind of like the only way I could think of it. The guy in the entire history of you, are we supposed to feel bad for him because he's distrustful of his partner and she cheated on him and then he becomes crazy and that's who we're supposed to connect with? Then in the Waldo moment, the comedian, he's failed and he hooks up with that other politician and kind of ruins her career, kind of out of spite. But we're really just thinking about all the women except for Agent Carter and Be Right Back. We're really portrayed pretty poorly. They're dishonest, they're unfaithful to their husbands, and that kind of excuses away what the husbands do in a way. I mean, it doesn't overall. We're supposed to be horrified and depressed, but it's kind of like within the logic of the stories, they're, like the women aren't sympathetic, and it's rarely from their point of view. We're following a guy's perspective on everything in the future, seeing it through their eyes.
On your point, Theresa, about the repetition, there was one thing that really stuck out to me is there's like two places, I forget which two episodes they are, but they have the exact same conversation where somebody says, "You're such a dick," and then they kind of laugh about it. And yeah, it did make me a little worried that if they had produced 50 episodes of this show,
yeah,
it
like
might
how
all
many...
kind of be the same thing.
Yeah, and I felt like in White Bear, the character, her boyfriend was the one who did the murder, but he killed himself in prison or whatever. So it's just kind of like, vilifying the woman who, of course, she was an accessory, but she's just portrayed as, she was under his spell of this man. She was manipulated, and the women in this show are, easy to manipulate by other men. We're not supposed to sympathize with a lot of the women. Lady Sybil in 15 Million Merits, she's drugged and turned into a prostitute, like a porn star, and it's just very easy, and that's the tragedy. Bing has to save the princess, the prime minister has to save the Facebook princess. It got a little repetitive when you watch them so closely together and looking at it from that angle. I didn't realize a lot of it when I was watching the shows, but then after thinking about them as a whole, I was kind of like, yeah, that's kind of saying something of a different way. And it's also ugly. And I noticed it more by the time when White Christmas came around, because I had time to think of the show. That, yeah, women in that were also very, like, culpable and very ugly.
Well, right. Let's talk about White Christmas. This one is a little hard to summarize.
Yeah.
But basically, there's a frame story where Don Draper is talking to some guy, and you don't know why. And then there are these sort of like stories within a story. And I guess so the first one, Don Draper is kind of like a pickup artist kind of coach for this nerdy guy trying to pick up a woman at a bar. So Therese, do you want to talk about that one in terms of the sort of women's issues you were just discussing?
Well, yeah, it's like, oh my God, the woman's a psycho. Like that's it. Like, oh, and it turned out Tonks is crazy. Again, like all right. So I guess what's interesting about this is because maybe Charlie Brooker is so familiar with, Mad Men and like the television landscape, to have Don Draper come in, or like his name I actually know, like John Hamm, to have John Hamm come in and be the star of this British show, it was a little weird. Kind of like, get this American out of Black Mirror. It doesn't feel quite like a Black Mirror episode. But then to have this slick guy who, whole pop culture persona is, the ultimate ad man. He could sell you anything. To have him play like a pickup artist, I thought was very smart and fit. But then it was and it just felt a little predictable to me. Like I didn't feel bad for the lonely nerd, who couldn't get a woman on his own. And it's not like I think he deserved what he got. It was just very heavy, like and malicious, I call it, like beating you over the head with this message of like, oh, this is dangerous and you don't know who you can be getting involved with, and women be crazy.
Well, can I just throw something in real quick to that part of it? Because you're right, this episode is like a couple of different parts. One thing is, so John Hamm isn't just the only pickup artist. Like, it's actually 5 or 6 of them who are all online at the same time watching this guy's conquest. They're all dudes, and they're all experiencing it through his eyes via technology. And what's interesting is he picks up this girl in the bar, and they go back to her house, the nerd and the girl, and he starts protesting. I don't want to do this anymore, because he starts to realize everyone's about to watch him have sex, and he thinks, things are awful. And they sort of egg him on. And one thing I thought was really interesting is it really ties in with a lot of these stories you hear about gang rape or group attacks or something, where everyone sort of eggs each other on to this point of no return. And it was interesting in this case where they all egg this guy on to do something he doesn't want to do. And the point of no return isn't that something horrible happens to the woman, it's that something horrible happens to him. Which I just thought was interesting. That sort of like group mind, let's all gang up and do something none of us would do on our own.
I mean, Sunil, what did you think of this episode?
I really like this episode. It is sort of hard to summarize, like you said, because it's using so many different concepts. But I was actually kind of interested in the fact that it was very relevant, and it was taking so many different things that we've been discussing over the year of the internet. Like, you have you have pickup artists, you have essentially like 4chan egging, you have Don Draper and his 4chan buddies. Coaching this guy into this with this woman. You have the concept of blocking taken to a whole new level, where if you block someone, they literally cannot even like acknowledge your existence. There are so many various various men on the internet type ideas that are thrown in this episode, which again does make the women come off badly, because you're portraying the men as you're sort of this episode is almost like an MRA episode in a way. It's sort of misogynistic to its core, and because of that, the women end up having to be in that role to do that. But then in addition to all that, I also just loved all the science fictional concepts, the whole the plot twist where we were inside something, the weird duplicates of self-help clones and weird virtual. Yeah, there's a lot of cool stuff in this episode.
Well, like there's the really horrifying thing where Don Draper tortures Talisa from Game of Thrones, and just that he's able to just put her in solitary confinement for months at a time, just at the press of a button.
Yeah, I heard someone describe that part of the episode as Don Draper mansplains to an egg.
Well, it's funny. I mean, that's something we should talk about a little bit, because that's the whole second half of the episode is the cookie, where it's people are able to download sort of their personality into programming that's then used mostly to run their households. So, the version of you that's downloaded into the cookie becomes sort of this in-house slave that knows you like your tea exactly at this temperature and what kind of toast you want. But like and be right back, it's a piece of technology that's where is it indistinguishable from a person?
There's kind of like an interesting underemployment theme going on there. Like, it's just cruel and unusual to use a person to run a house because it's so much less interesting than what they should be doing.
Well, I was going to say, it's cruel and unusual to have a person run a house the way women have run houses for hundreds of years. I mean, her horror at what she's being forced to do is maybe exactly like the horror of some housewife in 1948 who's like, wait a minute, this is the rest of my life?
Yeah, I think it would be interesting that a woman, like a modern day woman, would agree to using that kind of technology at all, knowing what it could imply and not being sympathetic to that.
Well, actually, can I just say, because Theresa, one thing I was thinking about when you were just talking about the portrayal of women in the show overall, One thing that's really interesting about Black Mirror is there's no writer's room. This show, every episode is written by Charlie Brooker, and he writes them on his own. He doesn't collaborate. So it's not like something like Breaking Bad or something or Mad Men even, where, there are people of color in the writing room and people of different ages in the writer's room and women in the writer's room. I mean, it's Charlie Brooker. And so I think to its benefit and to its, I guess, detriment at times, this show really is from a male point of view. I mean, it's very much from Charlie Brooker's point of view. And one thing that's sort of interesting, I think, is that over and over and over again on this show, women don't turn out to be who the guys think they are. Like in 15 Million Merits, he thinks that she's a princess he needs to rescue, when in fact she's as opportunistic as him and wants to get out of there as badly as him. She's rescuing herself. She gets the audition and gets out of there. And in I guess something like White Christmas, this guy thinks that this woman's an easy target and an easy mark, and she turns out to be crazy. Now that's another horrible stereotype. But it's like over and over again on this show, women, I guess there's this repeated danger that women just aren't projections of male fantasies for what they need them to be. Then again, they do wind up being like, a lot of things that don't sound great. They cheat, they do all these things.
I need to just put in quickly that, Grady, you're like 85% right, I guess, but actually episode 3, The Entire History of You, was written by somebody named Jesse Armstrong.
Oh, really? Oh, okay, I didn't know that.
And then episode 2, 15 Million Merits, Charlie Brooker co-wrote it with his wife, Connie Hugh.
Oh, he writes with her sometimes, yeah. And what was the other episode? Entire History of You?
Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah, it just feels like women are only good when they're faithful. Like the best portrayed woman in the series was the woman, like the grieving widow in Be Right Back. She's the only one who's portrayed as being smart and good because she's so faithful to her man even after he dies.
Oh, but see, I thought the woman in Entire History of You was, she's this, I thought she was actually nice. So, I mean,
Oh, I thought she was totally realistic.
Cheat. Yeah, but lots of people cheat, you know what I mean? And it's a little bit like in White Christmas, where it's another one of those things where this guy, the one that John Hamm is interrogating, he has this fantasy that his wife had this abortion and didn't want this baby and all this stuff, and that it's his baby, and he builds up this whole dream world around her. And then the second he realizes he's not even a part of her life, it's someone else's kid, it has nothing to do with him. Like he's not the main antagonist in her life. He's a bit part. He's a relationship that went away. That's when he freaks out and gets violent because she wasn't performing according to his script.
All right, cool. So, Sunil, any final words on White Christmas?
I like the fact that it had so many different concepts that all tied together. Like the fact that the blocking concept was sort of, oh, here's another thing, but it actually became part of the plot twist for the core episode.
Yeah, that ending was pretty cool with him being the registered sex offender, and he can't see anybody and they only see him as the sex offender wherever he goes. That was pretty interesting. Yeah,
the blocking was really cool, and it felt really I could see that happening.
I feel like a determined troll would really find a way around that, though. Right. And they're getting definitely more tenacious. But it would be nice to think about being able to block people like that.
Well, I was thinking, could you hold up signs, like sometimes they have in music videos and stuff, but but presumably they could make this, they could update the software to, every time somebody found a loophole, they could update the software to block that particular behavior, so.
Well, and they blocked, photographs of the person.
Right.
I mean, everything. Can I ask you all a question? Because maybe I watched that episode wrong, White Christmas. But did you guys assume that the lifelong block that the woman puts on her ex, that she intended that to be a lifelong block because she didn't want him to know the truth about the kid? Or did you think that it was a lifelong block because she just forgot to take it off because he didn't mean that much to her after a year or so?
Oh, I hadn't thought about that, but I'm actually sort of guessing the latter, and that it was I mean, like you do. Sometimes you block someone on Twitter, and then you forget that you blocked them, and why you blocked them a long time. Maybe now you don't block them, but you kind of forgot what happened, so you just leave them blocked.
But there's a part where he comes across her later, and she's still ignoring him intentionally. So I got the feeling that she just wanted him out of her life, and
Yeah.
Got it.
I think
Okay.
she was. I think she was a little scared of him.
Okay.
You know, and it was a long-term relationship, and yeah.
I don't know that it was a deliberate I will block you because I know that blocking you will keep you from learning the truth about your daughter. But I think that was sort of a great side effect.
yeah, I agree with Sunil there.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, okay. I watched it wrong.
Go watch it again right now.
Okay, and so like the last thing I want to talk about is somebody mentioned earlier that this is being made into an American. There are people are talking about making this into an American TV show. Does anyone know anything about that?
I know Robert Downey Jr. supposedly bought the rights to make entire History of You as a movie, but I don't know anything about an American version of the TV show.
Yeah, no, this is something different.
Robert Downey Jr. is making sort of a detective story of the entire History of You using that technology, but it was last year, I think late last year, at some point, there have been talks. It's one of those things where it's not actually happening as far as I know, but there have been talks. We're going to discuss bringing Black Mirror to America. And this was maybe only a couple months after it came onto Netflix, and, my general reaction, and as, was just, it's on Netflix. Just watch it on Netflix.
Exactly.
Why would you remake it? It's right there to watch.
Yeah, like would they remake Orphan Black for an American audience just because it's on BBC America?
Well, but on the other hand, there's like The Office and stuff like that they remake for an American audience.
Right,
but...
there have been. I mean, I agree that there have been. The Office was a great remake. I like the original, and I love the remake. But I think I feel like that's the exception for remakes when it comes to British television. They haven't been very successful. But the other thing is, of course, that you look at these episodes and sort of how dark they go, and it's definitely it does not feel like a network television show. You maybe on like HBO or Showtime, you could do a similar Black Mirror type series where you can go all the way and really, go into those darker places. But network television, they're not going to let you show the national anthem. They're not going to usually, like, even things like the entire History of You, like that goes to places where I feel like network's notes are going to say, let's pull this back and let's have them reconcile.
I mean, I didn't have the feeling, though, that they were just going to remake these particular episodes. I would have assumed that they were just going to tell new stories. And I did see that Charlie Brooker said that he would be the showrunner for a U.S. If they did a U.S. series, he would be the showrunner. So I think it would be pretty cool. I mean, I think that they should totally do that. They should get some female writers, and they should get me as a writer. And I think that would be really good.
But one thing I worry about is, we haven't really touched on it, but, this comes out of a whole tradition. I mean, the UK has always been really invested in spec fic anthologies. I mean, all the way back to the 40s with stuff like Dead of Night, the horror anthology, and all the Tygon and Amicus horror movie anthologies from the 60s and 70s. And then they've had like so many either horror or science fiction or fantasy anthology series. I mean, I was thinking about it for and there's like at least a dozen I can name off the top of my head. And so there's so much variety in the anthology format, especially when it comes to sci-fi and fantasy and horror in the UK. And over here, we basically have Tales from the Crypt and the Twilight Zone. Like every anthology about horror or sci-fi or something, it always has a twist at the end. It always has a moral because it comes from like one of kind of two sources of influence. So that's one thing I would worry about. And one thing I like about Black Mirror is there aren't these tidy little morals at the end. They're not these twists at the last minute where we go, oh no, it was a cookbook. And I really worry that that's something that would sort of be part of Americanizing it.
The other issue is, of course, is that with Black Mirror, you have these 6 episodes in its first special, and if doing that on the American system where they make you do 13 to 20 episodes in a year, I can't imagine the quality. Consider this. Consider the fact that we're almost generally agreed that every one of these episodes is really good, except for maybe Waldo moment. Now, you did like 20 episodes of that percentage may drop.
Exactly. I feel that I have that frequent complaint about American TV. They're just, when you watch Buffy or Fringe or Supernatural, anything, why are there so many filler, terrible episodes? I'd rather have shorter seasons with tighter storytelling, hands down.
Is there going to be another season of Black Mirror in the UK? Do we know?
I mean, I don't think it's been I don't think there's any official announcement, but in an interview I heard Charlie Brooker talking about it in vague terms. So I think it's certainly possible.
Yeah, especially as it's getting more popular now with being on Netflix. I think they'd be really smart to do another few episodes.
Now that we've done a panel on it on Geek's Guide to the Galaxy, like, they're going to have to
break big. Well, actually, and I just want to put in a quick pitch. I don't know if anyone else is watching Inside Number 9, which is another UK anthology show that's out right now. Has anyone seen it?
I haven't heard of it.
It's the League of Gentlemen guys, and there's been about 2 seasons. It's about 6 episodes a season, and they're 30-minute episodes instead of a full hour. But everything takes place in one location that's always number 9. Number 9 train carriage, number 9 room, number 9 call center answer stall. And they range from everything from there's a witch hunting one, there's a horror one, there's a seance one, there's a sci-fi one, there's a revenge one. And they're really amazing.
Wow.
And there's actually, because we were talking about Black Mirror and how depressing it is, and they've actually got an episode that is called The 12 Days of Christine that is one of the most, I mean, it's one of those things you watch and you just cry at the end. Oh, the humanity. But if anyone is going to download anything, not that you should, Inside Number 9 is very much in the vein of Black Mirror. And you know, it's another anthology from the UK that's just amazing from a couple of comedians.
I'll have to wait 2 years and then watch it so I can keep up my pattern.
Wait till it's on Netflix.
Yeah.
And I also do, like Theresa mentioned, the movie Her is basically a Black Mirror episode. It's really good and awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I like that you had talked about Ted Chiang, that Liking What You See story. I feel like it was the last one in that collection. I totally feel like that could be a Black Mirror episode. Yeah,
totally a Black Mirror episode. Yeah, man, but there are so many, not a lot of Ted Chiang stories are basically Black Mirror episodes because he does that science fiction, take it to, like, we're gonna see what happens when you do this science fiction concept.
Yeah, that never occurred to me, but you're absolutely right. It's why I like Ted Chiang. Actually, the one thing we never said was why it's called Black Mirror.
Oh, that's true. That is a good point.
Someone take it.
Oh, I mean, he said in interviews that, your screen, when you turn it off, it looks like a black mirror. But
it's also a dark mirror of our society and where we could be going.
I gotta say, after hearing that quote from him, every time I, put my laptop to sleep, I just look at it for a second and think, I'm scum.
All right, well, I think that's a good note to end on.
Yeah.
So we're going to wrap things up there. So we've been speaking with Grady Hendrix and Theresa DeLucci and Sunil Patel. So guys, thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, that was fun.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And that was our panel. So big thanks again to Grady Hendrix, Theresa DeLucci, and Sunil Patel for joining us on the show. Big thanks as well to everyone who's given us 5 stars on iTunes, including Bob from somewhere in NC, who writes, "This is a great podcast. The interviews cover all kinds of authors and movies, so they are likely to cover a genre that you are interested in, especially if you are a geek. And these aren't off-the-cuff interviews. You can tell the interviewers have done a lot of background research and are genuinely interested in the answers. The discussions are good too. There's a lot of give and take. The hosts of the podcast care about stuff that geeks care about and are willing to share their thoughts, ideas, and experiences. I enjoy when they discuss the first time they read such and such a book, because when they talk about how they felt when they first read it, I relive the same experience." So big thanks again to Bob from somewhere in NC for that great review. And of course, a special thank you to Matthew Proctor, Ellen Klauman, and Anton Castelli, who all signed up this week to support us on Patreon. Geek's Guide to the Galaxy is made possible thanks to support from listeners like you. So if you enjoy the show and want it to continue, please sign up to give us $1 or $2 per episode over at patreon.com/geeks. And if you'd prefer to make a one-time or fixed monthly contribution, you can do that over at geeksguideshow.com/crowdfunding. All right, so that was our show. So thanks to everyone for listening, and we'll see you next time.
The Geek's Guide to the Galaxy is a production of Wired.com. For more information about the show, visit geeksguideshow.com. To learn more about your host, visit davidbarrkirtley.com. Music and voiceover produced by yours truly, Jack Kincaid. If you enjoyed this program, tell your friends. If you didn't enjoy it, tell no one. Thank you for listening.